And joining us now to talk about this and more is Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi. His father was the last Shah of Iran, and his family has been in exile since the Iranian Revolution. He joins us now in the studio. Your Highness, it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to speak for the first time to the Catholic audience.
Well, we are so grateful. I first want to get your thoughts on this reported meeting between Elon Musk and the Iranian ambassador. What do you think this signals?
Well, first of all, I'm not aware of what the substance of the discussion was. And of course, in the world of politics and diplomacy, communication is a tool that is often necessary if we want to see it leading to anywhere. In general, what I've been saying is that this regime in 4 decades has proven to be unreliable, dubious, untrustworthy, and I don't think it is ever possible to come to any deal with it. And the reason I'm saying this is because you're not dealing with a strategic regime that thinks in terms of, conventional concern of national interest or security. It is an ideological, radical regime that wants to export its ideology while repressive its own people at home and trying to change the world the way they want to see it abroad. So it's inherently antagonistic to nations that are founded on principles of equality, human rights, liberty, which is the complete opposite. And I don't think that if there's any additional reading to whether or not this is an attempt to try to come to terms with them, I doubt this will happen, and this because of the nature of the regime itself. So I don't want to over-speculate not knowing what was discussed.
Yeah. How do you think the incoming Trump administration should deal with Iran?
Well, President Trump was perhaps the only president since the Iranian Revolution who had the toughest stance vis-à-vis the regime in terms of implementing maximum pressure. And that, I think, is an important component when it comes to curtailing the regime's ability to be, in a negative way, impactful in terms of, again, repressing its own citizens at home or fomenting instability or funding proxies in its conflict in the region and beyond. I believe that President Trump would probably continue that approach because he understands that it is through strength that you can achieve something, and the regime, in fact, has always backed out when it saw and faced, actual, in the old adage of peace through strength reaction. But is it sufficient for those of us who say, listen, the fundamental root of the problem is the regime itself. And as long as this regime is still in power in Iran, none of the problems we are facing today is going to dissipate. It's not just a nuclear issue. It's terrorism, it's radicalism, it's funding the proxies, and many other aspects. And if we ultimately come to the conclusion, and this is something I've been arguing the last 4 decades, that the primary flaw in the expectation of behavior change from the Western world was wrong to begin with, not understanding the true nature of this regime. The real solution is ultimately regime change, not because you say so, but mostly because the Iranian people say so, because they're fed up with the system, and they know that despite the fact that they try to bring change by means of reform, it can't be done. The only solution is ultimately go beyond this regime so we can have a completely different set of circumstances that will be both important to the nation in terms of being liberated, but also its immediate impact on the world as we have seen it since the regime took over. So the elimination of all the potential threats that this regime represents.
Yeah. What would that look like, a regime change? How would that take place in your mind?
Well, look, the process has to be based on civil disobedience, domestic defiance, and reactions. I think it can culminate in terms of labor strikes that can paralyze the system and force it to collapse. And obviously, once the regime collapses, we have a transition period within which time, in fact, the Iranian people will be able to have their elected representatives debate the future of the nation, the constitution, the laws, and the ultimate form that it could take. It's a process like anything else. And this is what the secular democratic opposition is mobilizing itself for, both inside Iran and what needs to be done there, but also what we can do internationally in terms of bringing as much support as possible for the Iranian people to have an actual chance of success, which is why I would hope that President Trump in his second term will not focus only on one aspect, which is important, which is the maximum pressure, but also parallel to that, incorporate a policy of maximum support. because this is something that can equal the playing field for Iranians who until now, defenseless and completely unarmed, has faced a regime that has been extremely repressive and brutal. And we need to give them a better chance of success. And I think there has to be one aspect of more direct support to the Iranian people.
Yeah, and give us a sense of what life is like right now for people in Iran. I mean, we remember Mahsa Amini, who died, also Mary Mohammadi, who we actually interviewed right here on the show a few years ago, who was in prison because she converted to Christianity. What is life like for people there, especially women and religious minorities?
Well, it's basically loss of opportunities, discrimination. Women were the first victims being treated as second-class citizens as opposed to what it was before the revolution. The regime immediately antagonized religious minorities, forcing them to flee the country. Baha'is, Jews were the first target. Christians lately have been the second target. And as a whole, I think every Iranian that has lived in Iran for the past 4 decades finds that they are completely disenfranchised, and the regime is only represented by a core group of fanatics, radicals, who only think alike with them to the detriment of 90% of Iran's society that has been outside of that fold. Which is why we believe, and I believe, that the only formula for Iran is to have a secular democratic system that guarantees the rights of every individual, that guarantees under the law their human rights, their equality, the freedom of their faith, the liberty that can only occur when there's separation of religion from state. I like to emphasize this point the most because I think it's not under a religious system that you can achieve those liberties and equalities. But as long as you have a clean separation, and the proof is in the pudding, as we say, look at America and the fact that religions here are free to do what they want. You can have your mosque, your synagogue, your church, or what have you, and nobody's going to come and defy that right. These are the kind of liberties, social liberties, political liberties, ethnic freedom, whatever it is that is the concern of the Iranian citizenry. At the end of the day, all of this can only be achieved when they're guaranteed a system that give them those equal rights, and that's the only way I can see the nation prosper.
Yeah, and life was much different before the Iranian Revolution. Some people may not remember that. Can you just give us a little snippet of what it was like?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question. Look, Iran has been a country that for centuries had different, it's a mosaic of different ethnicities, religious groups that live happily together in peace. There was never an issue. I remember when I was growing up, in Iran, people in the streets will not look at each other by defining them as to what ethnicity they represent or what faith do they have. We were all Iranians. Who cared if you were Jewish or Muslim or Baha'i or what? And the regime has created this divide by trying to, atomize society, have people find or try to lead people to conflict. But fortunately, the Iranian people have not been duped by that. They quickly realized what this regime is doing. And in fact, you mentioned Mahsa Amini. If you look at the fact that the entire nation rose, irrespective of what part of the country they were from. They were from Baluchistan, from Azerbaijan, from Kurdistan, different faiths, different religion, with one common slogan, asking for liberty and death to the dictator. That shows the solidarity of a very diverse society, but their ask and commonality of interest is one and the same.
So do you feel the people of Iran are ready for a change?
They are beyond ready because they are already on the streets, and that's my entire point. I think the element that brings the change in Iran decisively are the people of Iran themselves. The people on the streets are doing that. But they need more encouragement, more support, more guidance. And that's part of the job that I think I have in trying to help them with the transition post-regime, but also in this stage, what we need to do to mobilize ourselves to bring this regime down. And that's the part that my message to the world has always been. Why don't you invest this time on the people of Iran themselves? Have faith and trust in their wisdom, in their logic, in their aspirations, which is the same that you would have here in America or in France or any free countries. The very same principles of liberty and human rights are the desire and aspiration of the Iranian people. It's not that of Khamenei and his clique, mind you. That's the total opposite. But you've been focused only on this regime for 45 years and counting. The Iranians have not been brought into the equation as the solution to the problem. You've been only limited to deal with the regime and try to figure a solution limited to the regime itself, whereas it is the problem. The Iranian people are the alternative. You need to have a major shift of optic to see that the solution lies in the people of Iran themselves once liberated. And that's your best guarantee, not only to help a nation free itself, but the benefit that will derive from it in terms of other countries' own national security or even economic interest. Because a free Iran that will be open for investment, will be open for whatever will bring prosperity to the nation, will also create opportunities for countries that can invest in a country like Iran. You can't do that right now when you have a corrupt mafia, paramilitary, in symbiosis with a regime that keeps killing its own people, wreaking havoc in the world, and controlling every aspect of economy. So Iranians don't have an opportunity to prosper or to thrive. That's what the problem is.
President-elect Trump has vowed to bring peace to the Middle East. Do you think that's possible, especially with the regime in Iran right now?
Of course everybody wants peace, but can you ever have peace with warmongers? Only peacemakers can bring about peace. This regime is a warmongering system. The Iranian people, on the other hand, are a peaceful nation. We don't have any quarrels with Arabs or Jews. We don't have any quarrels with our neighbors. We don't have any quarrels with anyone in the world, so long as Iran's sovereignty is respected and we are treated, in the same manner. We are opening our hearts to the world. We want them to know that all the challenges as humanity we face, particularly in our region, all the demanding issues that is upon all of us to work towards solution together in harmony and in collaboration, can only happen under the mantle of a peaceful system, not one that constantly tries to create inciting. I'm looking at the Iranian challenge of the water crisis, for instance, or things of that nature, which is not only limited to Iran, it affects the whole region. How can we all collaborate? How can we have the kind of relationship with the Israelis, with the Arabs, so that we can tackle many problems, spend our revenue on education and healthcare rather than missiles and atomic weapons? Here lies the main difference. So I think this is the vision that we can hope for, and the Iranian people are certainly ready for that. And I hope the world finally recognizes that this is an opportunity not to miss. We can really change the face of the earth, of our world, in a better direction than the one it currently seems to be pointing at least in the region.
Your hope for your country?
Well, I think, as I said, that the Iranian people already know what they need to have, but they need to have more solidarity coming to them, to the world. Listen, we've seen the precedents of it. We've seen the precedents of it going back to the era where the Soviet Union finally collapsed, when Ronald Reagan stepped in and did what he had to do to ultimately put an end to the totalitarian communist system in the world. And we saw as a result what happened in Eastern Europe. Lech Walesa and company, Nelson Mandela and company would not have been successful had there not been some element of support for them. And I think this is exactly the kind of issues that I hope will be incorporated in the policy of this administration, that beyond trying to control escalation or conflict, you really cannot contain or appease this regime. You ultimately have to find a solution beyond the regime. And again, I say not because you say so, but because that's the actual ask. But see if that actual ask actually meets your own standard of principles. You have a natural ally with the Iranian people. They are the actual boots on the ground. You don't need to deploy troops to make that change happen or spend American taxpayers' money on it. You can, in fact, use frozen assets of the Iranian people and redirect it and repurpose it to support them in their challenges. So the solution is right there in front of our face. So there has to be, I think, a pivot from what has been the traditional way of looking at Iran. And at this point, knowing that you have 95% of Iran's society that don't want this regime anymore. This regime is becoming more and more isolated every day. Former reformists have given up on that concept. They are not converging with those of us who have always argued that a secular democratic alternative is in the best interest of our nation, and I think for the free world. So that's the challenge in front of us, and what we could do with it sooner rather than later, and not have more opportunity cost to a nation that deserves much better than what it has.
Yeah, before we wrap up our conversation, do you have any messages for our audience?
Well, I think when we believe that a lot of what inspires people around the world to have compassion, to care, to understand what suffering happens, when there's injustice, when there is repression. It behooves any human being to take action, not to be silent. How they choose to do it, by action, by prayer, by help. There are so many ways. But it's the idea of feeling connected. And what I would like to say is that, you know, I say in my talk to my fellow citizens, I want to move the needle from hope to belief. That we should go beyond hoping for a better world, but believe that we can actually get it done. And the quickest way, I think, that you can make the Iranian people know that although they should not count on anything other than their own resolve, but how easier it would be for them if they knew they have a lot of compassion and support from the rest of the world. And that, I hope, is a message that our viewers can convey to Iranians, that they are not alone in this and that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are praying for them for sure. Thank you so much, Your Highness, for coming on this show today.
Thank you for
we
having
appreciate
me.
it. God
Appreciate
bless
it.
you.
Thanks.